and he calls another press conference.
I'm not going to allow one prank phone call to be a distraction from the reality is that we have a job to do.
Does that not sound like union busting?
If you look at the impact that President Reagan had, he talked about was doing the right thing for the right reason at the right time.
And it's not about budget deficits.
The Wisconsin protests are now spreading as union workers fight more Republican tactics and budget cuts in other states.
Well, the state budget battles that began a few years ago in California are moving east, and it's catching on everywhere.
Pro-union protests in Ohio, Michigan, and as we just saw, Indiana.
The president stays silent on union protests and focuses on jobs, protests overseas, and the right to marry.
North and south, east and west, voices are being raised together to oppose suppression.
According to Attorney General Eric Holder, President Obama has concluded that he can no longer defend a federal law defining marriage as only between a man and a woman.
The Justice Department says it has concluded that that provision of the law, declining to recognize marriages in states where they're permitted, is unconstitutional.
Okay, Pat, even you're evolving on this, Pat, I can tell.
You're not going to change his mind by
Yes, I'm going to change his mind. I'm not going to
Richard Socrates and
mind.
Good evening. Governor Scott Walker has insisted day after day that his budget repair bill is about saving money and not about union busting. But in a phone conversation with a man he believed to be billionaire David Koch, Walker let down his guard and said it.
This is about public sector unions. You essentially are having taxpayers' money be used to pay to lobby for spending more of taxpayers' money. It's absolutely ridiculous.
The phone call was a prank. Ian Murphy, the prank caller and editor-in-chief of the BuffaloBeast.com, will join us shortly from Buffalo. It is not just what Walker said about unions that has excited the governor's critics. It is his staff's desperate eagerness to put a man who said he was Koch on with their boss without feeling any need to check if it actually was Mr. Koch. That seems to put another check mark in the column of bought and paid for by Koch Industries. Koch Industries was the second largest contributor to Walker's gubernatorial campaign, giving $43,000, the maximum allowed. The Koch-backed Americans for Prosperity funded last week's counter-protests, and its president told the New York Times that Americans for Prosperity was working to encourage a union showdown even before Walker was inaugurated. And Americans for Prosperity has launched the Stand with Walker website, which encourages every state to adopt Walker's so-called common sense reforms on unions. Tonight, another state is on the list. An Oklahoma House committee tonight approved repeal of collective bargaining for state workers. But back to the phone call. Mr. Murphy's quest began when he wondered if anyone could get Governor Walker to take a call after reading that some of the Democratic state senators couldn't get a call returned. So he worked on a voice, worked up a story, and called the office.
Hi, it's Scott Walker.
Scott, David Koch, how are you?
Hey, David. I'm good. And yourself?
I'm very well. A little disheartened by the situation there, but what's the latest?
We're actually hanging pretty tough.
The two exchanged niceties about Governor Walker's strategies for getting Wisconsin 14 to return to the state to vote. Walker stresses that he will not budge, he will not negotiate, and when asked about if this movement is spreading, he can't help but pat himself on the back.
Brian, the new governor over in Nevada, called me last night and said he was out in the Lincoln Day circuit the last 2 weekends, and he was kidding me. He's new as well as me. He said, Scott, don't come to Nevada because I'd be afraid you'd beat me running for governor. That's all they want to talk about is, what are you doing to help the governor in Wisconsin? You know, the next question, I talk to Kasich every day. You know, John's got to stand firm in Ohio. I think we can do the same thing with Rick Scott in Florida. I think Snyder, if he got a little more support, probably could do that in Michigan. I mean, you start going down the list, you know, a lot of us, there's a lot of us new governors who got elected to do something big.
You're the first domino.
Yep. This is our moment.
And now for his moment. Joining me now is Ian Murphy, editor-in-chief of the BuffaloBeast.com and the most important phone caller of the day. Ian, walk me through this. You call the office. Why didn't they say to you, we'll take a number and we will call you back? I mean, that's the standard procedure when an office like this is receiving a call from someone who might be important, but in order to find out that that's who it really is, they have to call back.
Right. Well, the second call I did make, the chief of staff did ask for my number so they could call me back. But seeing as I was using Skype, that was impossible. So I made up this story on the spot about my maid, Maria, who had accidentally washed my phone. And so now I was calling from the void, I said. I was using the void and the snipe. And amazingly, he just said, sure, that sounds totally believable. And so he gave me the time to call back, and I called back later and got right to the governor.
And the governor seemed very comfortable and eager to talk to you. Were you surprised that it went as smoothly as it did? And I mean, when you're on the phone, did you think he's gonna, in the next sentence, he's gonna catch me? He's gonna, I'm not gonna be able to keep pulling this off.
No. Just getting on the line with him was a feat in itself, I think, and I think he's just oblivious, generally. So it didn't surprise me.
And so as the call got going, you were confident that this thing was gonna work. There was just about nothing you could say that would tip it.
Basically, yeah.
And you drew him into criticizing this network. He had some harsh things to say about MSNBC.
Yeah. Well, not Joe Scarborough. He's one of us.
Well, he was on Morning Joe, and he said he thought he was treated fairly on Morning Joe. You also pulled him along in directions about what this fight is about. When you came out of this conversation, why do you think now, after this conversation, why do you think this governor is not going along with the agreement that exists thus far? The union's willing to make all the financial concessions he's asked for. Why do you think he's hanging in there and holding on to the provisions that would in effect destroy the union's ability to negotiate?
Profit for himself and his people he associates with.
And do you get the feeling that he's ready if this goes the way he wants it to, if he wins this? Did you come out of it with the feeling that, as John Podhoretz said today in his column, that he should run for president? If he pulls this off and wins it all the way, he should immediately set off and seize the Republican nomination for president?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, he should. Go for it.
Did you feel the Reagan comparison he was giving for himself was the way he now sees himself?
Yeah, I felt that comparison deep down. It really rang true, especially considering Reagan was just pretty much out of his mind.
Ian Murphy, my phone answerers have been warned. They will not be taking any calls from any Buffalo numbers without calling back, checking out who it really is. Ian Murphy, editor-in-chief of BuffaloBeast.com, thank you very much for joining us tonight.
Thank you.
Joining me now is Jeffrey Sachs, director of the Earth Institute at Columbia University and professor of economics. Professor, thank you very much for joining us tonight.
Pleasure.
You hear in that phone call the governor saying, I'm talking to John Kasich every day. This is what we have been suggesting here, that it feels to us like this is a national Republican governors movement. This is not just one state trying to get control of its budget. It seems that that phone call shows us that this is the hope is that this governor will be able to spread something nationwide.
Well, this is absolutely coordinated. There's no doubt about it. And it's not an accident that one Republican governor after another is trying to crush the unions, crush workers in general. And what's astounding is we have the greatest inequality in income and wealth in the history of this country, and you have the billionaires going out to absolutely do the final deed of crushing workers to the maximum extent. It's amazing what's going on.
George Will's column has what I thought was the smoking gun on this even before the phone call, where, and it's praiseful, George Will loves what the governor's doing, and the governor says to him that he's hoping that if his bill succeeds, that eventually union members will look at their unions and say, why do we need this?
The reason they need it is that the wages have been going down while the income at the top has been soaring. And what these billionaires have been doing is buying up the whole Congress, now buying up the governors to make sure they never have to pay taxes again. And then we have these huge budget deficits because they don't pay taxes anymore. And what do they want to do? Cut the benefits for the poor, cut the education stipends, cut the wages of the teachers. It's unbelievable, the game that's going on in this country. A little bit of it was exposed today, but this is absolutely vile. Given what's been happening in the last 20 years, we've got workers going down, we got billionaires soaring, and they're doing everything they can to put in that final twist.
And why would the Kochs care about a little union question in a state like Wisconsin?
Well, what they're doing, they have business in Wisconsin. They have polluting industries all over this country. They have bought up all the Congress on the energy committees in the House and the Senate on the Republican side to make sure that we never do anything about the coal industry, about oil, about our dependence on imported oil, on climate. They have bought everything they can in politics. They're making sure they never have to pay a tax and never have to do any environmental control.
Would Ronald Reagan look at what's happening today and say, yes, Governor Walker is the inheritor of my spirit. This is the lesson I was trying to teach by firing air traffic controllers when they went on strike?
He might. I mean, it is true that Reagan got a lot of this started, of this unbelievable surge of income and wealth inequality. We've never lived like we do right now, with the middle class disappearing in this country and the rich in a contagion of greed trying to crush the bottom. And I think Reagan did get that started. People revere him to this day in this country. But the fact of the matter is that when you look at how the middle class started its decline in America, it was in the 1980s when the tax cuts on the top were given, the budget deficits opened up, they started to squeeze education and social spending, and we're breaking this country in two. That's what's happening.
Now, and a lot of the discussion that I've listened to over the last year about public education in this country, there seems to be a rather relentless, conscious and sometimes subconscious attack on teachers' unions. Teachers are the problems. The scores aren't going up because of the teachers. It seems like they've isolated the teachers as the reason why the schools are the way they are. It seems to me that we've got some kind of political spillover from that dialogue into the anti-union talk that we hear now.
Well, that dialogue itself is a gimmick. It's trying to find a cheap way to take a social crisis that we have in this country and find someone to blame. You have poor kids that can't make it right now, and so blame the teachers, not blame the poverty, not blame the neighborhoods, not blame the inability of mothers to provide a decent daycare for their children, to get a decent preschool. So this is part of the same story, actually, which is we're crushing the middle class in the country. And then the rich, who want to pay no taxes, are doing everything they can to blame the poor. And it's out of control. It's spiraling out of control. And where is President Obama right now, frankly, when we need him to be defending the basic values of this country? We need to hear his voice.
We are going to be talking about President Obama's role in this in the next segment. Jeffrey Sachs of Columbia University, thank you very much for joining us tonight.
Thank you.